Hello and welcome to ThinkpodS3, powered by the FII Institute. For more than 30 years, I led Sky News' coverage of global events, holding to account the politicians and change makers shaping the world of today. In this series, filmed at the 6th Future Investment Initiative in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, I've got the opportunity to question those shaping the future. At this inflection point in our history, how can we ensure that the future is one of prosperity and opportunity for all? This episode, we meet Patricia Bubner, founder and chief executive of Orbillion, working to develop the ethical and sustainable food of the future.
The food system and how we produce it right now is not sustainable.
We discuss the practicalities of growing food from molecular scratch, democratizing access to a healthy and varied diet, and the culture shift required to support a meat-free future. First of all, thank you very much indeed for joining us on ThinkpodS3. Could I ask you to start by introducing yourself?
My name is Patricia Bubner, and I'm the CEO and founder of Orbillion Bio. We are a San Francisco Bay Area company, and we make meat without the animal, or how we call it, cell-cultured meat, which is the most delicious meat that you can really imagine eating. And we start off with the best beef there is, Wagyu beef.
Before we get on to the beef, tell me a little about your career so far, as it were.
Yeah, of course. So I was trained as a chemical engineer in Austria, which is where I'm originally from. And then I did my postdoc at UC Berkeley. And it was really interesting for me, coming from a very small and local food system, to come to the US and realize that everything is on a bit of a different scale, especially how we make food and how removed people are from the food system. And during my postdoc in sustainability and second generation biofuels at the Energy Bioscience Center at UC Berkeley, I also started a food project that dealt with grain diversification and was working with farmers. And that really brought me back to my original interest that I always had in food and how we build food. What is flavor chemically on a molecular basis? How can we build nutrition? And from that, when I learned about cultured meat, I immediately grasped that that is the solution of the future that combines my interest in building food sustainably and nourishing people with the science that I was trained in doing. And I saw that there is a lot of movement in the area, but nobody was quite getting it right from my angle. And that's really where my journey started. And I joined a biopharma company to learn more about how can we scale cell culture. Because
just before we get there, I just want to know, what is grain diversification?
Happy to talk about that. We eat pretty much one type of wheat, one type of corn and rice, and that dominates really the grains that we're consuming. And that is a process that started in the last couple of decades. We forgot about a lot of the ancient grains. So we dealt with millet that comes from Asia, that's also very popular in Africa, and that has inherent drought tolerance, which is, as you can easily see, very important in the times of climate change. So it's very important that we find also the other grains that are available to us for a future-proof diversity in grains for us to eat as humans.
You're clearly very passionate about this. Why are you so concerned about wanting to find alternative sources of food?
I always was aware that, especially after coming to the US, that the food system and how we produce it right now is not sustainable for a future where we need to, first of all, feed a lot more people, but also have different regions in the world that have different resources. And I always think of the way, if we look at industrial agriculture right now, if we knew where we would end up today, the amount of antibiotics that we use, the unhealthiness of the meat that we produce, the animals that we really use and slaughter in millions, would we have planned a scale-up process like that? And what are the alternatives to scaling up food production with the knowledge that we've gained in the past decades? How can we build on what the farmers have built in the past, which is an amazing system to really make food for all of us and feed all of us? How can we build a new system with the knowledge that we have now that enables us to really feed everyone, to make food healthier, and to really be able to move or create a food system for the future that is resilient?
Are you saying, to put it in its crudest terms, that if we carry on as we are now with our farming methods, with our growing population, that we're going to starve, we're going to run out of food?
I think running out of food, it's a question like, I'm not sure that we will have meat to eat in the future. look at climate change, look at the impact that our farming methods have on climate change, right? Look at how we use our resources right now. It's just not sustainable. We saw, for example, last summer in Kansas, there were thousands of heads of cattle dying because of the heat, because they haven't been bred to live through heat like that. This will come more and more and more. We will have less feed to feed the cows, right, or the cattle, and in general, the animals, the livestock. And we will run out of really that type of meat to have it accessible for everyone.
The methods we're using to farm now are actually contributing to accelerating the problem. Would that be
They
right?
are. Like right now, cattle alone is 8% of greenhouse gas emissions. That's the same as concrete.
So where does what you're doing now fit into this?
So we are taking the best cells from the best animals, and instead of scaling the animals, which is not very efficient, we scale the cells only to make meat in cell culture. And that is a method that has been perfected over the last decades, mostly in biopharma. But the process we're using, bioreactors, is the same bioreactors we see for making beer or wine or things like that. So a very familiar process. The beauty of this is that a cell is very, very efficient in converting the nutrients we feed it. Like cattle is not very efficient in the calories that they take in and the protein they produce for us. They are one of the least efficient ones. Second is lamb, which we know in this region especially is highly consumed. So the cells are much more efficient. We feed them with ingredients that are very simple, glucose, amino acids, and we make delicious, complex meat out of it.
It's probably a stupid question, but if you can cultivate cells, why do they not grow into animals?
That's a great question. If we have cells, we multiply these cells. We don't grow tissues per se, right, or animals, but we grow single cells, first of all. We can also grow tissues, and in the end,
but everything grows from one cell originally, doesn't it?
Exactly, exactly, yes. So that's a very defined method. You need to know exactly which cells you have, and we know what the cells are doing, we know which nutrients they're creating, how we can create flavor. So that's all a very well-defined process.
Is this going on now? I mean, are people eating cell-grown meat?
So right now, there is one product that's approved in Singapore. That was the first region really to approve cell-cultured meat. We're waiting for more regulatory approvals. That takes time, of course, because this is a new food product.
Where else do you expect to get this to happen?
See, I think this is a great question because this is a huge opportunity. Because wherever it will happen, this will attract companies to manufacture, to launch their products, and to really move into this region. So there's a huge opportunity to actually build that regulatory environment for cell-cultured meat.
Where do you think next? Is it going to be in the United States, which is...
I know that we're based in the United States, and there is significant progress being made on the regulatory side. The FDA and the USDA have been talking to companies. We're also in a community of companies called AMPS, the Alliance for Meat, Poultry and Seafood, that's actively working together to really give the regulatory authorities also the information that they need.
How does it work in terms of the texture of meat that you grow?
So what we make is meat, real meat, and the flavor and the texture
are... Is it kind of Petri dish shaped?
That's one of the things that I really would like to debunk. I don't know where the Petri dish thing came up and why my people referred it to. We make it in bioreactors, again, like in a brewery. So you make single cells and you differentiate them into tissues and you grow them on what we call is a scaffolding, and that helps us to get a certain structure.
So you could grow, as it were, different cuts of beef?
Yes, but we start with ground beef because there's a huge market for ground beef. It's actually in food service. If you look at it, it's 80% of the beef is ground beef, but you can later on, of course, make any type and sort of product. But the question for us is always, what is the biggest market that we can address? And how can we make sure that the product that we have, we can launch that as soon as possible? So our first product will be ground beef.
What are the inputs compared to the input now to get ground beef?
Get
a burger.
So for that burger, what we do is we grow the cells in a nutrient-dense solution, which we call the media. And in that, you have really what usually a cow supplies to its cells in the bloodstream. So we have all the nutrients, the vitamins, we have glucose in there, amino acids, and we really only give the cells what they need, and we can monitor that precisely. Whereas a cow, for example, eats a lot of grass that gets broken down in its guts by microbes and then very inefficiently converted to meat, but also other things that we don't need, like hooves and bones and all of that. We don't need to grow that. We just grow the actual meat.
This is sourced from a single cell. So would your meat be classed as vegan, for example, or vegetarian?
We're going after the meat market. So for us, we provide products for meat eaters, and what we're making is meat. So 96% of people are eating meat on this planet.
Sure. All I'm saying is in some cultures there are demands for ethical food sources or plant-based food sources.
Of course, I mean, there is the opportunity to have an ethical food source. It's just not the primary market that we're targeting.
But would you consider it to be an ethical food source? Doesn't involve killing.
Absolutely, I do.
So have you done, as it were, an audit of the inputs which you need and how sustainable they are?
So right now we're in a process of scaling up, and of course, the important thing is to not only say, look, we think this is more sustainable, but to really put that down and say, how can we make it more sustainable? We know that we have, compared to, for example, animal agriculture, 78% less water use, and we have 92% less land use and greenhouse gas emissions. So that's already impressive. It's relying on using alternative energy sources, for example, which is very important. And we will soon announce a very exciting partnership in that realm that will actually show that our billion really does care a lot about making that promise of cultured meat true.
Because obviously it requires heating and cooling and things like that.
Exactly, and fresh water.
And if it wasn't coming from renewable sources, would it be a very heavy demand of energy for that?
In general, scaled up bioreactor reactions need energy, yes. So it's definitely important to have alternative sources for that, but it also is a question of availability. For example, in regions where you cannot even raise cattle, where you cannot produce meat, well, what other option do you have, right? So in the future, will we be able to meet the demand of meat by conventional agriculture? Likely not. So what other chance do we have? But to get back to your point there, yes, renewable energy sources, of course, is something that is very important for this industry to really tie to the process. But still, even if we don't use these sources, we're still so much more efficient than anything you do in traditional agriculture.
What about taste and smell and all that?
Yeah, it's all chemistry in the end. You can find out what makes that flavor. What do I need to feed these cells so they taste a certain way? Like, what do I need to feed that cow so the meat tastes a certain way, right? That's what we find out at our billion. That's where we really dig deep and understand the biology of these cells. Flavor is the number one thing we need to get right. Flavor, texture, cost, health benefits. These are the major drivers for consumers. We know that from different analysis that we've done, that other groups have done. So we are focused on getting the flavor right, on getting products out there that people will want to buy again and again. And I believe that we will make the best meat that there has ever been.
Where do you think this is going to be most useful?
It's not a question of usefulness. I think it's a question of how do we want to eat in the future? And if we do not lay the foundation for that now and understand the technology of nutrition and of flavor now and create the technologies, we will not have a choice. And I don't know if future generations will get to eat the meat and the types of meats that we have right now if we don't find other ways to do it.
Does it grow faster than
Absolutely,
animal meat?
Yes, absolutely. Much faster, much more efficient. Once we are at scale, there is really no limit, but really you can produce tons and hundreds of tons of meat that way, globally, decentralized in different locations around the world.
So right now, to produce a pound or a kilo of beef, how long does it take?
Usually about 15 days, but again, you can also produce, if you have a bigger bioreactor, you can produce much more in the same time.
Who are you finding are most interested in investing in this?
So the investors come from all different areas. There are some of these are interested in climate tech because there is, of course, a big climate angle to that. Impact investing is a big thing. Food tech and big food companies too that are interested because they see the consumer demand. We recently just announced a partnership with a big European food producer or meat producer and meat distributor. And we see that more of the traditional meat distributors really are very interested in having something that's more sustainable, that is also the same every time. So you get a uniform product quality every time. You get something that's healthier. So they know the consumer demand and really are interested in investing, co-investing also, building up manufacturing and leveraging some of their expertise as well as putting some of the capex down, which is important to us. And in the end, we are a food product. And it's a really exciting time because we are now bridging the gap that was between biotechnology and food and making food products using the technologies that we've developed in the past decades. And I think that's very exciting.
Do you think, obviously IP is a factor, do you think it's a technology that is going to, in the end, production of cell-based food is going to be dominated in the way that the internet giants are on the internet, or is it something that you think is going to be widely spread?
It's a huge market that we're going after. There will be multiple winners, and the differentiation will be in the products in the end, right? And in how you really get to access this market. I don't think that everything will be our billion, but we'll definitely get a huge slice of that pie.
So where does that leave your ambition for the next decade? What are your ambitions for the next decade?
So we have an amazing product that's ready to go to market, really shape that regulatory framework will be very important globally, so we can open up these markets and really have people being able to access the products that we're making, and to grow the manufacturing capacity around the world and really being able to produce globally.
Patricia Bubner, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed this conversation.
In these turbulent times, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Thinkpod for more insight and analysis.